All right, welcome into the show. I'm your host, Cayden Sturgis. It's a little bit behind the scenes. We're going to do this in one take. We're going to pretend it's live because it better be. The plan for this show every week, I'll break down my favorite college football matchups, and I think I'll try to add at least one or two graphics to every week's show just to try to get better every single week. And yeah, we'll see it all the way through. Of course, it's week 5, an absolutely loaded slate. I've only got 4 games planned to preview in this format. I'm going to preview every game I find remotely interesting in 60 seconds on my TikTok. So if you want to get that, I'll link it down below in the YouTube section. Let's get this started, though, with my game of the week. I'm a Georgia fan, so you know our game of the week is in Sanford Stadium when the Alabama Crimson Tide come in to Athens to face the Georgia Bulldogs. And I really don't know where to begin with this. So both teams last year put on an absolute thriller. Bama came out, punched Georgia in the mouth. Georgia slowly climbed back into it. And then a Hail Mary type of throw from Jalen Milroe to Ryan Williams. Ryan Williams just dons his Superman cape for a moment and wins the game for Georgia. Carson Beck unable to complete the touchdown drive of his own when he was intercepted in the end zone by Alabama. So Georgia had the better season last year, but I think both teams have a bad taste in their mouth. And whenever these two uniforms are on the same field together, it really elevates college football. It's about as good as college football gets. I think I could compare it to probably the same feeling whenever you saw LSU and Alabama on the same field together during the first 5 or 6 years of the Saban era. So that Les Miles versus Nick Saban style of, or those games that were always like dubbed the game of the century. Obviously, you had the 9-6 game in there for LSU Bama. I digress, but that's what it feels like whenever Georgia and Alabama match up. Kirby Smart still the coach at Alabama. Nick Saban no longer the coach, or excuse me, Kirby Smart still the coach at the University of Georgia. Nick Saban has retired, so it's year 2 for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, and DeBoer got the better of Kirby in last year's game. I think a stat that's been talked about a lot in this one is Kirby is just been completely ineffective against Alabama. 1-6. Of course, 6 of those games against Nick Saban, only the one against DeBoer, which of course was a loss. So before, I think a talking point into last year's contest between these two was, did Kirby have a Saban problem or did he have an Alabama problem? And I think if you watched a lot of Georgia football last year, even though they lost this game, there were the fact that Kirby won as many games as he did, won an SEC title with that team, might have been his best coaching job to date from one of the best coaches in the sport. Even though they didn't compete for a national title, didn't make the Final Four. Very, very impressive coaching job. I think this is a much better team for Georgia coming into this season, into this matchup. Alabama, on the other hand, has a lot of question marks. Last year, they looked like a buzzsaw coming into this game, minus the South Florida game, which we've kind of learned South Florida is just going to do that to you. And Jalen Milroe continued to just dominate against Georgia. Very similar situation where both teams have buys coming into this game, same as last year. And Milroe could do no wrong. Ryan Williams was always open, and Georgia had no answer until the second half. Kirby Smart made some just really good adjustments, and Georgia stayed in the game, got hit in the mouth, got back up off the mat. We talked about that a little bit in the Georgia-Tennessee review, how this team under Smart has really done a good job of persevering. You can never quite put them away. And I can't not say the same about this Alabama team. So they're 2-1 coming into this, but we all still remember that Florida State game where they were favored by 2 scores and they scored first on their scripted drive, looked to be running away with it, and then Florida State came up, sucker punched them, and ever since whenever Alabama was truly challenged, they bowed away from it. They ran away with their tail tucked between their legs. They had no toughness to speak of from a competitive standpoint. They were ran all over, and just you could see both on offense and defense that there were guys who did not want to play that style of game. And then, of course, the last 2 weeks or the last two games they played. Like I said, both teams had a bye coming into this one. They dominated Wisconsin and Louisiana Monroe. But neither of those teams had the talent or really coaching, but mostly talent to ever pose a threat to Alabama. They could not get ahead of them, and therefore Alabama was never truly tested. And for someone, when you question their toughness, you don't question their talent or their skill, you question their toughness. It's not about how it is when the game is easy, when you're able to hand the ball off and get 5, 6 yards of carry, your receivers are open by 5 yards. It's when you have to really dig deep and you have to get an inch lower than that offensive lineman who's the same size as you to try to push him back. When it's the fourth quarter, you've been out there for 70 snaps and you just have to dig deep because you need that extra yard. Alabama's not had to do that since Florida State, and I don't know if they've fixed those issues that we saw from them in the Florida State game. Georgia, on the other hand, I know can play a competitive game. They had a lot of questions going into the Tennessee game. Just didn't perform great against Marshall offensively. They really had their toughness called into question against Austin Peay, which was a weird circumstance given the rain delay and everything. But then Tennessee, just 1, 2, 3 punch, has Georgia flat on their back in Neyland Stadium in front of 100,000 screaming fans who want nothing more than to see a bloodbath. Let the Vols really sink their teeth into Georgia's neck. And Georgia got back up and was able to punch back, and we watched this all-out brawl continue for 4 quarters and more extra time, where Georgia proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are extremely competitively tough. And I don't know. I just think that this game comes down to more than talent. It always has. Whenever these teams are in the same ballpark recruiting-wise, they always seem to play a game that comes down to 2 or 3 players. Your quarterbacks in this game, of course, Ty Simpson going to get the start for the Tide. Georgia rolling with Gunnar Stockton after his big game against Tennessee. And you can look at the numbers. Across the board, Alabama is better than Georgia, but you have to take into account that Tennessee game. The games that were competitive for both of these teams, so the Florida State game for Alabama and the Tennessee game for Georgia. Georgia played a much better offense than Alabama did in Florida State. Well, actually, that's not true. Florida State, one of the best offenses in the country. So I don't know what to think when it comes to these numbers, other than Alabama ran the score up against their cupcake teams. Georgia's favored in this game just by 3 points was the last time I looked at it. I'm going to take Georgia to win, and I know that's going to sound biased. And I didn't really get into any of the players or anything, but I really like the competitive makeup of this team. I know how they react when their back is against the wall, when they have to dig deep, and it's a very good sign. And so far, I only have one example of Alabama having to dig deep and play to the best of their abilities. And instead of meeting that freight train head on and trying to derail it from Florida State, they jumped out of the way and got ran over by the other freight train coming. Theoretically, it wasn't a good metaphor. But I just don't trust Alabama to be able to play in a competitive game yet. And that's not anything that's backed up by statistics. That's just by watching the Florida State game. I can't shake that feeling of watching linebackers just get out of the way because they get out of the way of a block because they don't want to get hit, or making business decisions, especially after growing up in the era of Saban and those teams. I just can't imagine an Alabama team doing that. This is only their second road game. They went to Florida State before, and they did not handle it well. Georgia is going to run the ball well, I believe. I do expect to yell at my TV about Mike Bobo multiple times in this game, but I think he's going to be willing to um, let Gunnar Stockton eat a little bit more than he did early in the Tennessee game. I think he's earned that trust. The one thing that worries me really as a Georgia fan is Ty Simpson. If he's given time to throw the ball, he will find Ryan Williams down the field. The way to pick on Georgia is going to be their defensive backs. We saw Tennessee take advantage of that with Brazel and Aguilar. Just absolutely Aguilar slinging bombs to Brazel and other receivers. Kirby with 2 weeks to work on that. I'm sure that it might be better, but Ryan Williams is an all-world talent at receiver. That is what gives me pause, and that would be what would give Alabama the firepower to stay in this game. That being said, I think as a full team, I think Georgia is a much better team than Alabama at the moment. And I do expect an all-time classic game, like I expect every single time that these two teams get together. So I'll take Georgia to win and cover. I'll take them by 6. So give me Georgia 30. Well, I'll take them by 7. 38-31. Dogs take it over the Tide. Moving on now to the next game, the Big Ten game of the week. And now I'm really hoping my computer doesn't die. I probably should have plugged it in before recording. But it's Oregon and Penn State. Two absolute juggernauts that have not been tested up to this point. It's going to be a whiteout in State College. And I am very excited about this game. Very much a 2-monitor night to keep an eye on both Athens and State College. What to say? Because neither of these teams have been tested so far. And I was very high on both of these teams coming into the year. I did have Penn State winning the Big Ten over USC, so I didn't have Oregon making the Big Ten title this year. But I've been proven wrong on many things so far this season, and I don't really know what to expect. Penn State, in their few games to start the season, let me just make sure I have their schedule correct. Penn State against Nevada, Florida International, and Villanova, only giving up a total of 17 points, and they've scored that in multiple quarters so far. And for Oregon, it's not much better, considering that their schedule has been Montana State, Oklahoma State, Northwestern, and Oregon State. A little bit better, but not much better. And they have allowed a full whopping 37 points in 4 games. And they're outscoring their opponents by 30, 40 points at least a game up to this point. I think it's going to come down to what style of game can be played in this one. Oregon obviously has a defense. It's very much made in Dan Lanning's image. It is that Georgia-Alabama team that you've grown accustomed to just on the West Coast. And they're still going to get lumped into how we thought about them in the Marcus Mariota years when Chip Kelly was there. That they're just this high-flying offense and nothing else. That is not true. Penn State, on the other hand, has a quarterback. Drew Aller, in what seems like your 12th season in college football, he's been playing well. But like I said, the competition has not tested this Penn State team, which may have the best offensive line in the entire country. Oregon has multiple players who can get after a quarterback, can make Drew Aller's just night very, very difficult. And I didn't bring him up earlier. I thought I mentioned DJ Uiagalelei, but his brother Matayo, we're going to call him Matayo U because I don't trust myself to pronounce that multiple times. He already has 3 sacks in this one, or on the season so far. and just a defense that is going to clog the run, get after the quarterback, a very, very talented defensive front for Oregon. And I really want to see how they match up against that touted Penn State offensive line that's just not been challenged so far this year. Speaking of the offense, or not speaking of the offenses, but the offenses in this one, Dante Moore, almost 1,000 yards, and he's been pulled in the second half of every single one of their games so far. He's been absolutely lights out as a quarterback. He's got 11 touchdowns to only 1 interception, only taken 1 sack on the season. And I think that that's just a testament to how mobile he is. He's able to get after or just really sit back, understand defenses. He's been able to not be under pressure. And I don't know if he's going to have that luxury. Speaking of, this is also Oregon's second road game of the year. They did go to Chicago to play Northwestern, but that's a completely different animal than crossing the country to play the Nittany Lions in State College. It's a whiteout. I'm not sure how they're going to handle that necessarily. But speaking now of Penn State, they are the third ranked team in the country by the AP poll. So it's worth about as much as you can throw it. But Drew Aller, he's only has 4 touchdowns on the season, but for Penn State, a majority of their points are coming on the ground. You have Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. They're both getting quite a bit of carries. Singleton a little bit more than Allen so far, but combined they have 8 rushing touchdowns on the season behind that offensive line, which is absolutely stacked, made to run the ball. Drew Aller is going to go out there and try to just not lose this game for Penn State. And I'll be honest, I don't really have a feel for this game as much. It's neither of these teams have been tested. It might really resemble what that Texas-Ohio State game did early in the season, where we expected the teams to, both quarterbacks, to probably play pretty well, but the defenses were good. But we did not expect a 14-7 game. Both of these quarterbacks, Aller for Penn State and Moore, of course, for Oregon, they've had reps, 3 or 4 games each, to get used to the offense and this year get used to their chemistry with receivers and running backs and get their feel for game speed. This is going to be a lot quicker for them, though. I think both of these defenses are extremely capable, and offenses have shown nothing to be concerned about. Like I mentioned before, Oregon is able to win this game in more ways. Their defense is not as good as Penn State's, I don't think, but they're able to run the ball just as well as Penn State, if not better, and they're also able to throw. Dante Moore has an absolute cannon for an arm. But Penn State is favored. I wanted to check the up-to-date lines just to make sure. Penn State was favored when I looked at it this morning. Yes, they are still favored by 3.5, according to ESPN Bet. And I don't know. I could see this game going multiple different ways. And for right now, I'm going to take Penn State. As much as I love Dan Lanning, and I think he's a better coach than James Franklin, I am going to take Penn State to win this and cover. I think the atmosphere is just going to be too much for Oregon to handle, but I think this is not the last time we see this matchup in 2025 or early 2026. Right now, though, I don't have a great feel for this game. We just don't have enough tape against quality opponents for either team. So I lean Penn State, and with it only being 3.5, I lean them to cover as well. So give me the Nittany Lions, and if just solely for home field advantage, and I think if all else fails, running the ball and playing good defense is going to win you more games than not. So give me Penn State. All right. Okay. So had to take a minute and plug my laptop in. We're going to move on to our third game of the weekend. This is in the 3:30, 2:30 time slot, and it's in Oxford, Mississippi, between two of the drunkest fan bases in the South and in the entire country. And this is one drunk football game. Of course, I'm talking about the Louisiana State Tigers going into Oxford, Mississippi to play the Ole Miss Rebels in the Magnolia Bowl. And what a week it's been for this game. So, LSU and Ole Miss, they're always going to be tied at the hip. Just a very storied rivalry, a lot of moments that I can think of from my childhood in this one before I even knew really what football was about or anything. I could remember the game that LSU was driving down the field, needed, they were either down 3 or 4. And they're driving, they hit a pass over the middle, and they cannot get up and snap it in time. They clock it, but they clock it with 1 second on the clock. And I remember Les Miles just frantically waving at his quarterback, no, you have to run a play, you have to run a play. And I forget who the quarterback for LSU was at the time, spikes it, thinking they got it off, and the entire Ole Miss defense just goes crazy because they know they won the game. And that's really the first thing I think of when I think of the Magnolia Bowl. And those old SEC on CBS graphics with the blue scoreboard and transitions and everything, that's just peak college football. That's peak childhood right there, between LSU and Ole Miss. Also peak LSU Ole Miss. Lane Kiffin's daughter dating a linebacker for LSU. What in the world? Just I don't want to touch on that. I think it's more of a PR stunt than anything. But that's I guess what you get when you combine the Grove and everything that Ole Miss is known for with Lane Kiffin. Anyways, I'm getting sidetracked. I need to pop the graphic up. There we go. So, both of these teams, 4-0, vying for what would be first place in the SEC West if we were still back in those days. We are not. And both of these teams, at least on paper, should be very battle tested. LSU has wins over Florida and Clemson and Southern last week, but are not going to discredit Southern, the Jaguars, I believe. If I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll have many people who love HBCU football coming after me. But Ole Miss, I think, is even more battle tested than the LSU Tigers because LSU's played Clemson and Florida, two teams that really struggle offensively, which has made LSU's at least statistically great defense look good. Which I think on paper it should be a good defense, but they really haven't been tested all that much, have we? I mean, we saw Florida beat themselves with DJ Lagway throwing 5 picks to the Tigers at Death Valley at night 2 weeks ago. Ole Miss has played 3, I think, decently quality opponents of varying quality. Kentucky, they won pretty close game. Arkansas, they needed a fluke fumble, but they managed to get the job done against a Arkansas offense, which is actually quite elite with Taylon Green under center. And then last week, they took what I thought going into the year was the top group of 5 team, was my pick to make the playoffs with Tulane, and they embarrassed them. And I did not expect to see that. As high as I was on Ole Miss kind of going into that Tulane game, I didn't expect it to not be a contest in the slightest. And Lane Kiffin's bunch has delivered so far in the season, 4-0. And that was the kind of game that it felt like they would lose last year. That felt like the Kentucky game last year when Tulane came in there and they decided to just shut up all the noise and beat the Green Wave. There we go. Hiccups right in the middle of recording. Gotta love it. So Ole Miss also 4-0, and if you look at just the graphic over here, I forget the screen's mirrored, has you're going to see a lot of strength on strength in this one. Ole Miss's offense is one of the best in the country, 12th in points per game, 9th in yards per game, and that is against at least um, maybe not SEC quality. Kentucky and Arkansas are going to be hanging out at the bottom of the ranks in the conference this year. And Tulane is probably one of the top American teams, but those good teams that have good, solid defenses versus LSU's defense, which I mentioned so far, has only seen Clemson and Florida, both of which have not proven against any other competition that they can score with any consistency or really have that home run threat that we've seen LSU shut down in the past. So it's going to be strength on strength all game. I think I'm really interested to see what do the weak sides of the ball for either of these teams do when they're pitted up against the other team's weak side of the ball. So of course Garrett Nussmeier he had a lot of praise for or during the Clemson game, but I think that was for when we thought that Clemson was better than they really are. And I don't want to discredit LSU for that win because they were not favored going into that. And them and I think Georgia Tech really had or sent Clemson spiraling for what might be a really long season for the Tigers. So I don't want to discredit LSU for that win. And Garrett Nussmeier looked good, but the offense did not look explosive. They were unable to really run the ball, and that has carried on throughout most of this season. They've really struggled to move the ball, put up points. They're only putting up 29 points a game, and it feels like half of that average came from their win last week against Southern, where they absolutely ran the score up. It was like Brian Kelly was trying to prove a point, which he probably was to the media there in Baton Rouge, who has been really on him this season about the way the offense has looked. So I don't know. How does Garrett Nussmeier respond? How does this LSU offensive line respond to the running game to Ole Miss, which has been you've been able to get your 300 350 yards against Ole Miss so far this season. I think they looked pretty good against Tulane last week against Parker Retzlaff, and they held them, I believe, to 15 points. I might need to go look at that score again, but Ole Miss looked much better last week than they did against Arkansas. And let's be honest, I think Taylon Green might tear Notre Dame a new one this week. Losing to or giving up yards and points to Taylon Green is nothing to hang your hat on when you can get the W. And I don't know. We're going to have some quarterback controversy because I believe it's going to be Ty Simpson or not Ty Simpson. Let's see. Have they announced the starter yet? This is the things you're supposed to do in your pregame, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be, yes, excuse me, it's going to be Austin Simmons. I don't know why I got him and Ty Simpson messed up. This is not Alabama. I believe Austin Simmons is going to be the starter. I think that's what was said on McAfee earlier today. But I would not be surprised if Lane Kiffin at halftime or pregame, came out and said, you know what, Trinidad, you're going in. You've played really well. You've earned your starting spot. Let's see what you can do against a top 10 defense in the country. And I think either of these starters can get the job done. I would probably roll with Trinidad if I was Lane Kiffin, but Lane Kiffin makes millions of dollars a year, and I'm stuck making YouTube videos. So I believe he knows just a little bit more about football than me. Not much, but just a tad bit more than me. But regardless of quarterback, I would start Trinidad, but regardless of the quarterback, I believe that Ole Miss has the better team. Just all around, they've shown me so far this season against, in my opinion, better competition, that they will be able to just just absolutely blanked there. I don't know what happened, but I just think that they're going to be able to handle an LSU team that has a lot of questions offensively. And when in doubt, I really like to go with an offense over a defense in college football. If defense is not super elite. So I'm going to take Ole Miss to win this, especially given the game is in Oxford and not Death Valley at night. So I'll take Kiffin to win and cover against LSU. And the last game I wanted to talk about tonight, it's getting late. I'm recording this at 2 in the morning, something like that. I don't know. I've been making graphics and stuff for what feels like several hours. Got my caffeine, a little bit of sweet tea from Countries, if you know. But we're going to go back to the state of Mississippi, and this time we're in Starkville. And let's be honest, I mean, we're shaping up for some of the best in-state rivalry games we've had in years across the entire South. Tennessee and Vanderbilt both look like top 25 teams, top 15 teams in the country right now. Georgia Tech, I mean, I would be kind of surprised if Georgia Tech was not undefeated or only had one loss going into clean old-fashioned hate against Georgia. Why is that not in Bobby Dodd? I put up a video of my first trip to Bobby Dodd, by the way, on TikTok from last week when they played Temple, and I really enjoyed my experience there. Those fans deserve to have a game of that magnitude played at their home stadium, not in Mercedes-Benz, but I understand why they took the millions and millions of dollars to play it about a mile down the road. But anyways, Alabama and Auburn. This is an Auburn team that looks like they're going to be able to challenge Alabama for the first time in a few years. Miami and Florida State, that's next week. That's going to be one heck of a ball game. And, of course, the Egg Bowl. Both Mississippi State and Ole Miss are playing really good football right now. And that's why Mississippi State is getting my attention. They have that win, of course, against Arizona State. That's their best and really only competition they've played so far. Tennessee, that lost to Georgia 2 weeks ago, but they decided to, they got a win last week. And yeah, I think both of these teams are good. I think that they're in different leagues, not literally. They're both in the SEC, but I do think that this is a different tier of football than what Mississippi State is prepared for from Arizona State. And I might be wrong, but this is a Mississippi State team that has been at the bottom of the SEC for several years now, and a Tennessee team that has really ascended under Josh Heupel. We watched what their offense was able to do against a Georgia defense that I think is pretty good. Joey Aguilar was slinging the rock to Chris Brazzell down the field. They were able to run the ball against Georgia at least better than I expected them to be able to. And it's a Tennessee offense that has actually improved without Nico under center or in the shotgun for Josh Heupel. So that might have been the absolute best case scenario for Tennessee. Go and get Aguilar from App State, and they have looked a lot more explosive than they did last year with Nico. For Mississippi State, if we're looking, they have an offense that has been able to put up points, not nearly at the same level as Tennessee. But you have to keep in mind, Tennessee loves to run the score up against their cupcake teams. And so far, I mean, against such wonderful competition as Syracuse, ETSU, and then UAB last week, they've put up 56, 72, and 45 respectively. And of course, they put up 41 against the Georgia Bulldogs in the one of the most watched college football games, one or two so far on the season. Mississippi State, they've just gone out and handled business. That thrilling win, the biggest win at home in Starkville for the Bulldogs in years against Arizona State, where they won 24-20. And they've beat Southern Miss and Hattiesburg, ran the score up 63-0 against Alcorn State, and handled Northern Illinois by 4 touchdowns last week. So something I just want to keep in mind when it comes to this game is just how Mississippi State's defensive backfield is going to handle the passing game for Tennessee. And I know that Tennessee is going to run to set up the passing game. So Mississippi State is going to absolutely have to shut down the run for Tennessee. That's their only hope. They have to make Tennessee one-dimensional to try and at least be able to play 3-4 to be able to focus on rushing on Aguilar, be able to drop guys back into coverage. And if they are having to worry about both the run and the pass, having to load up the box to stop the run, and that leaves, really talented receivers on the outside one-on-one, you have no safety help. That's not going to be a very good game plan for Mississippi State. So I think that that's going to be probably the most underrated part of this game. How does Mississippi State handle the Tennessee run game? Because if they can't handle the run game, they have no chance at handling that wicked Tennessee passing game. Tennessee, last time I checked, was favored in this one, but we do need to make sure of that. Still, yeah, so Tennessee's favored by only 9.5 now in Starkville. This is a 4:15 start, so a little bit of a weird start time. And as much as I really like this Mississippi State team, you've got Blake Shapen in what feels like his 6th year in college football. I just don't know if they're going to have the firepower or the talent to get this one done against Tennessee. And Tennessee, I had ranked in my my personal poll I had them ranked 21st, but that was only because there's so many undefeated teams right now that have wins against what I would say even or at least competent competition, that in terms of a resume standpoint, I can't put Tennessee ahead of them. But I think if I was power rating Tennessee, it would probably be close to the top 5, even with that loss to Georgia, because they're a field goal away from probably being ranked 2nd or 3rd, right where Georgia is. So I don't know. I just don't see Mississippi State having the horses to keep up in this one. I think it might be close for maybe a quarter and a half. And I would be very happy to be wrong, but I think Tennessee is going to hit too many of those deep balls down the middle of the field. I think Aguilar's going to have too much time to throw the ball. And I just don't think Mississippi State's going to be able to really consistently stop the run. So for an offense as good as Tennessee, I think they're going to just pick apart the Bulldogs in Starkville. And I really hope that doesn't happen. You know my allegiances on this show as a Georgia fan, but I am going to take Tennessee to win, and I'm going to take Tennessee to cover that 9.5 point spread in this one. All right, I'm getting tired. You can already tell that, I believe, from how I've slowed down my speech. I'm kind of not able to read my notes as well. I'm talking a lot slower and a lot less coherently. So I'm going to go to bed and set this to upload. So I hope y'all enjoy. And yeah, let's have a great Saturday just sitting on the couch watching one of the absolute best slates for regular season weekend I can remember in a long time. If there was a interesting game to you that I didn't cover in this episode, I probably covered it on my TikTok in 60-second form, mostly because I trying something a little bit new, doing a preview on this show and then previewing the same games and other games in 60-second form, or otherwise my TikToks would be 6-7 minutes long just from the little bit I have to say about each of these games. So this way I get the best of both worlds, Hannah Montana. So to everybody who watched, thank you for watching. If leave your thoughts down below in the comment section, and if you like what you saw, be sure to let me know and hit the like and subscribe button. Every little bit helps. So, all right, I'm going to leave you to it. And Dogs by a Million on Saturday. You've been watching Chattahoochee Sports Talk, and I'm Cayden Sturgis.